Welcome back to another database episode. It's been a while, but I thought it was time to go and have a deep dive into gaming news, technology, and all things video game related. So let's kick off with the first story on episode 29. PSVR2 price has been slashed in half earlier this week. Well, actually, 33%, or a third of its actual launch price has come off Sony's premium headset, which puts it in line with the launch price of the PSVR now. So in the UK at least, £349. There are deals elsewhere, £100 off on Amazon, I think it's £429. So I expect these deals to be shifted around depending on the pound dollar where you are. But in the UK, £349 makes it very cheap for a premium headset. And that means both the PS5, the PC owners, all like me, many of you guys watching this who have both, you now got a single VR headset across both, which is a reality and a nice one at that. And this could be a big growth area for PlayStation, with this price cut kind of demonstrates that they are aware of it and they're more than keen to supplement that. I also thought this was a plan for Sony right at the start, as I discussed in my review, and the PC does need some additional hardware and software on top of this. So first, there's a £50 USB adapter with a display port that's required to hook it up the 4K device to your PC of choice, along with that display port. The other is a software related and comes in the form of a PSVR2 app that is free on Steam. And essentially it's a dedicated hardware driver as well as the setup stuff to get everything hooked up and most likely interpret native commands from that Steam VR game. So Unreal, Unity or whatever engine it's running on takes those calls and translates them to a native option for the PSVR2. The other part, which is making this a bit of a pain in the arse, is you have got to buy a display port, which is one thing, which is not great. If you've got why does the adapter not come with it? You've got to literally get a secondary one. That's a bit of a pain. And you need Bluetooth. And it doesn't come with a Bluetooth connector. So would it be better, in my opinion, for the actual adapter to have Bluetooth in it? I know that people may have Bluetooth on their device anyway, but it means that everyone's got to buy one if you haven't. And there's probably a lot of desktop PCs that don't. Most of my desktop PCs don't have Bluetooth. So that's a pain, in my opinion, because that means that you've got to rush out and buy one. And there's some confusion over which ones actually work, or at least how good they are. There have been ones sent out to reviewers in Germany by the looks of things. I haven't had one from Sony, so I've got to wait and buy my own when it turns up. But it's not available as of yet. It's out next week, the 7th. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to get one very quickly and give you a full review on what that looks like. But that's already a bit of a higgledy-piggledy mishmash of options there. The VR, obviously the Bluetooth, is needed for the controllers because you can't just connect them with a wire, which is, like I say, I don't understand why it wasn't part of the actual PC adapter box. So there you go. You're going to spend 50 quid for that, plus potentially another 15, 20 quid for a Bluetooth adapter that supports the actual controllers, and there's obviously iffy stuff there, and that means that you've got like 3 separate purchases to get it all hooked up. Once it's done, it is a one-stop shop, and you can just go straight back and forth between PC and PS5, and obviously I'll be testing that in more information. So overall, that part's a bit of a mess. I wish it would have been a simpler solution in the box. The fact that they're not even available on the PS Direct either, or anywhere else, in fact, that I can see, this close to launch means that maybe they're not quite ready for this and they're rushing out the door for revenue streams. But whatever the reasons are, I like the idea and I think the plan is a sound one. I just don't think it's being very well managed at this point. And there's no PR marketing for it. They're not really pushing it by the blog that they had. Now, this obviously instantly opens up every current Steam VR game for the headset. So this single biggest VR marketplace, by and large, is PC. And it shows that, yet again, Valve have become kind of a strategic partner with PlayStation, or at least they're not getting in their way, as it's competing with their own Valve VR hardware, and it will almost certainly drive sales on their platform, with only Sony published titles benefiting from that directly. So Sony are kind of supporting Valve, Valve is supporting them, and therefore it might end up growing the VR market. Games will come, and I expect some first-party VR games to land as native ports for the PC space that will probably make far better use of the hardware, because obviously, as I mentioned before when I did this on a previous video, foveated rendering won't work currently as it's not supported in the app and on any games that are using it. And as noted on my earlier videos, many of the hardware-specific functions won't work either. So like head rumble, finger tracking, see-through view, all those options may or may not work as well as they do on PS5 or likely at all. So that means you're going to need specific developer ports or development patches to update and unlock a lot of these options within the suite of the hardware features. So That's also another area that Sony could lean into, and I do expect that they're going to be pushing some of the big games that they've released. So in reality, this is not it's not a huge issue, as let's be honest, the lion's share of the PC VR market space doesn't have a lot of these functions either, and these features don't really run on any of the games. So you're not missing something that you don't already currently have because it's not there. It just means you're not getting the best out of the PSVR2 headset. And obviously that means you can play many, many games, including, of course, Half-Life Alyx, which is still a top-tier single-player narrative and atmospheric game that kind of stands proud on the platform overall. And this can now be played and enjoyed on the PSVR2. You just need a PC to do it. I do expect other titles to land. So I do expect things like Horizon Call of the Mountain to land, potentially other ports back from, updates from PSVR 1 days. So you could see Blood and Truth. This could open up a market for Sony to try and recoup some of the cost on those PlayStation VR titles and bring them over. Astrobot would be perfect, bringing that to the PC space using the headset. That would be amazing. I think it would be a huge title on there, as I've covered in my review. I love that game. I thought it's amazing. On the back of the obviously the PS5 full-blown single-player title coming later this year, which looks amazing. I think that'll be a good boost for PSVR2 sales also. So I do expect a big push from Sony in some way, shape or form. That said, they've not really been the marketing juggernaut they were of late. So they do need to kind of get themselves back into the minds and hearts of a lot of gamers, because I think generally Sony seem to have disappeared off the face of the earth. There's not a lot coming from them from marketing. In terms of the games they've got coming out and their presence in the market, they're not making big announcements, they're not doing big shows. We've gone through the whole E3 period and they didn't really turn up either just before. They did a little session there and showed some games off, and they're keeping their powder dry at this point. And I think when it comes to PSVR 2 getting a price cut, there's been no announcement. It kind of just happened and I saw it and that was it, and I'm saying it, and I've published it and said it, and I'm a big advocate for VR, as everyone knows. I've always been pushing it since the day it started. Even before the 90s, I was a fan, even when it was crap. But here, they're pushing it out on PC, and they're not really pushing it hard. They're not marketing it, they're not selling it, they're not even sending out review code. They've never even sent me any, as far as I'm aware, any marketing to promote the fact that they were doing it. I did see the blog, and I put that on a previous video a couple months ago when they announced it, but that's what I mean. So I think Sony need to do a little more to get more engaged. And maybe they've got a plan, maybe they've got something coming up at the end of the year. Maybe they're working with strategic partners and certainly, influencers and all that. I'm here, obviously, to do my reviews. I'll work with companies to do reviews on products that I think are relevant, that my audience want to see. And when it comes to VR, that's hugely important to me. It's hugely vital to what I like to engage my time with. So it's something that I would have thought they would have contacted me about. So that's also a bit odd, but hey, it is what it is. I'm not, I'm not. They don't owe me anything. I get what I get, and I review what I review. What I don't get for review, I tend to buy anyway. So I cover everything based on what things I'm interested in, and hopefully what you guys and girls may want me to cover. So when it comes to PSVR 2 on the PC, I am excited. I think the sales cut and the push could make a big difference. It could help grow the market overall, and it certainly could help Sony's bottom line and certainly improve their profit margins and potential growth with VR. I was having conversations online with other people around the fact that I thought that there would be more games in my review period where they'd have that, like Resident Evil did, Resident Evil 4, where we had both the full player game in 2D or on screen, flat screen, and then the VR mode would be part and parcel of it, or VR modes within the game that are slightly different. And they haven't really done that, so maybe there's a longer term plan with that. Maybe PC's part of that to get even more return on that ROI. I don't know, but hopefully this is the first step for them to try and push this out a little further. So yeah, PSVR 2 is coming to PC very soon. Next week we'll have a full hands-on coverage, and be sure to like, subscribe and all that downstairs so that you get a view of that as soon as I possibly can get it up to you. So next up we've got some remasters and remakes and whatever else they can be called, and they're kind of often a contentious subject, but Braid Anniversary Edition was a big indie game that launched in 2007, and Jonathon Blow has been quoted all over the gaming press from his Twitch channel. I think a quote from his Twitch channel, and I'm going to quote one of the things that's been turned into headlights of the game sales are dog shite. That was the one that came out and was grabbed it, and it's kind of been sold as he's been disrespectful and just greedy and all this aspects of what he said and didn't say. And I'm just going to quote what he actually said from his actual article. You can see it on screen now, and it all depends on your standards. If you compare to nostalgic things like the Jeff Minter game that's on Steam or Atari 50, it sold much better than all of those, but it has still sold like dog shit compared to what we need to make for the company to survive. The future is uncertain, let's put it that way. It hasn't been good, it just hasn't been good. So he did say this a few times and he got asked multiple times, and overall it's just not sold very well in his expectations, obviously, and he would know because he owns the company. But commentary aside, some kind of additions to the game. Let's talk about the game first. So the game was kind of a director's cut, in my opinion. It was commentary, some small visual tweaks. They updated the graphics and redrew some of the 2D art so that it's higher quality, higher resolution, looks better on higher resolution screens. It's now on the Switch and all that, and PS4. It's got bonus content and extra levels, and that's one of the bits about it. So most of the extra levels are actually pre-alpha stuff. So stuff that they made as they were developing the game and improved, and it's not really a new level. It's actually just, pre-alpha game levels that finally became what they became in the final game itself, which is fine if it said that. It didn't say that. It kind of made out like it was brand new levels. So I get some of the, disquiet on why that wasn't a good thing. But this is likely not enough content for a £16 or $20 director's cut. And I still think that games should adopt that as a marketing type, aside these anniversary updated editions, remaster, HD update, whatever. I think a director's cut has some specific, connotations with the audience, specifically when this also has developer commentary with the game. So I think a puzzle game like this, and The Witness, which I also loved, and I reviewed that way back when on my channel and website. It was an amazing game, really up my street, reminded me of Myst and Riven and all those kind of games, which Riven's just been redone again as well. And they kind of need to understand the market for such an update. It's likely going to be very small. That's my point. If you play a puzzle game and you get right to the end, if the puzzles are fixed, you're not really going to play it again, because the 100% reason you play a puzzle game is to solve the puzzle. So I think he's missed the trick there. The platforming's good, and I get that, but fundamentally it's the same puzzle, same level, same process. So you're going to know what to do. It's just playing it again. And if you've already got it at home on Xbox Live or PS3 or PC or whatever, you're not going to go and rush out and buy it again. So even though I think the discourse has run a little wide online, with some sites trying to paint Jonathon as this dismissive, hateful guy for, in his words, poor sales, but I think this comes down to the above kind of expectations that he'd set for himself, and higher expectations in terms of the original. Again, going on figures, we don't know, but we know he made 6 million revenue from it. So the original sold under 1 million copies. $15 a pop, 500,000, taking into account sales. That's 6 million that Jonathon Blow made from the game. Admittedly, this slightly more than that, because obviously you've got the Xbox Live, the Steam, the PSN costs to go alongside it, because it was digital, but it was still a very lucrative indie title, one of the biggest ever, in fact. It cost 200,000 to make, I think it said, and so $500,000 realistic figure in terms of sales. That's £6 million return. That's a lot. That's a cracking return. That is from time well spent. So I think that he missed the trick, and this is where I think again it's all about knowing your market and why there's many routes to market. I think he should have done absolutely go along with the anniversary edition. That's not a problem at all, but he could have released it as a $5, £6, whatever DLC for the original owners, so that those that owned it originally could have kind of got an updated version with this extra content, the updated visuals, and flip between the two, and then they could have had the option to buy into that. And I think that would have doubled his profits, as I think many people then might have said, you know what, for £5, I'll give it a go, I'll listen to the dev commentary, I like Jonathon Blow, I like the stuff that he's made. But for £16, that's 3 times as much, and that's more of an effort to get another copy on another piece of hardware that you may or may not own. So I think he's missed the trick there, and he's trying to pull in new sales only, and I think both is fine. He should have done both, in my opinion. That's what I would have done. I think it would have been easier to do it, specifically on Steam. I think it would have been easy. Maybe not as easy on Xbox Live and stuff, because obviously the consoles are out of date, but the PC one could have been a big win for them. There's some reward and acknowledgement to the audience here that it kind of makes it a success, and it would have been a good move, in my opinion, if he'd have done that by saying thanks everyone for buying the game and supporting me in the beginning. If you did, here's a free DLC additional version for $5. I think that goodwill would have gone a long way, and it could have helped his sales. However, his comments, I think, have been kind of misconstrued or blown out of proportion, showing a lack of like kind of logistical, economics, and clear business and development sense from much of the press, in fact, and YouTubers, and anyone really involved in trying to push this narrative. And again, I'm not saying that it's a huge problem. I'm using it as an example to try and talk about these things in a more confined manner. So as I've covered before, my video gaming bubble a few months ago, which kind of continues this approach, kind of as per another new topic, kind of I touched on before around development. Development is expensive, so it doesn't matter whether it's games or anything else. Running a company costs money, and employing staff has a burn rate far higher than just the salaries alone. So remember that if we take the UK for example, you have to pay national insurance for your staff, which is around 13% of their full-time salary, on top of your standard company VAT charges, your profit and tax, and other expenses, which includes like you got a minimum 5% pension of their salary as well if you've got full-timers again. You've got the hardware they're using, any software they need to use, their desks, their offices that you're going to work in, any travel if they're going around to events or education, or if you've only got 5 staff, for example, plus yourself, then on the average £30,000 per year salary, and you're probably going to need far higher than that for some of the people you need for engine development and graphics, that's going to cost the owner around £37,000 or 22% more than just the wage alone. That's just on the cost of the employee. And then a tiny office with 5 staff and equipment to operate within, at best, is probably going to cost you circa $500k a year. If you do nothing at all, that is just, you outsource your payroll, your accounts, etc., and you pay yourself no salary and ship nothing. So now you see that Jonathon's point was in the fact that he was using Braid Anniversary as a way to keep the lights on, with likely an expectation of similar figures to the original, now that the market is significantly bigger than 2007, but it's obviously shrinking, in between that time. You can see his mindset, and he likely had an expectation, again, I'm pulling these figures out of nowhere, but likely, 1.5 million expectation revenue to come back from the sales into, the business coffers. And that's it. Gives them like a year or 2 years of capital to finish off their next game. And he's got doing a new language as well, J language. So I get it. I totally get what he's doing here, why he's doing it, and I get the logistics and the economics around it. And he could have handled it better. But it does show that even small, genuine indie companies, which he is, such as this, can be stung by that capital investment area because they've got no capital. So you need money coming in unless somebody's going to give you money. And if a VC needs money, you need to put it as an IPO. And then you've got the government weight as well placed on top of that for small business specifically, which makes it really hard to get strangled small business because it's so expensive to simply exist because you're competing with multinationals that you just can't. So this is why an understanding, and this is just basic understanding of economics, business, and obviously politics as well, because it has an element of this, should be a bare minimum to weigh in on the comments of what he was saying with an understanding, or at least a basic understanding of the place they're coming from and where he's coming from, which I totally get. So Jonathon maybe should have also explained himself much better to his audience as well in his Twitch stream. So some of this is on him. He should have actually said, I need to enlighten the audience as to my reasons for saying this and what my expectations were. Not completely confess and say this is what I expected, but give some weight to the conversation so people would run off. And even if they did then misquote him, there'd be something else within that context that you could just pull out and say, no, I said this as well afterwards. Because obviously sound bites are what everyone's into, no one reads past the headline nowadays. So it's very important to get the specifics in there. So this again is just reiterating what I said before. If huge companies can fail with millions and millions of dollars of investment from VCs, then a small company like this can hang on a knife edge month to month. And even a big hit, such as Braid was, and to some extent The Witness, which is also a very popular game and did good numbers. Hopefully it's kind of food for thought for those that maybe didn't know about all this stuff, may have read the headline and it gives you a bit of insight. And maybe if you knew all this anyway, and you may agree with me, you may completely disagree with me and think, what the hell is he going on about? I'm not defending Jonathon and some of his comments, but people are allowed to vent off on their Twitch and not get, pulled across the coals because they are a developer and they're slagging people off. I don't think he was doing that at all. I don't think he was making a big song and dance about it. I think he was just making it very clear that these decisions that he is making and the reason the sales were poor wasn't because he wants to have a multi-million-dollar lifestyle and, live in Miami with a Ferrari. It's because he wants to employ people and make new things. And if you don't get sales, then that makes it very, very hard, i.e. he's got to go and get loans and take a risk again. And he was trying to obviously get away from that. So Again, not really a technical conversation, but more of a commercial conversation. Just thought it was relevant. I like the game as well. Staying on this theme in terms of operational costs, running costs, and keeping the lights on, we do have another one in terms of back to my bubble video. And Bungie rode a double wave of Halo dominating the gaming space, becoming this big thing for Apple or the Macintosh, and then it got snapped up by Xbox, and they lived the dream. That, as I said before in the IPO stuff, they lived the perfect dream, and Destiny became their next big online hero shooter, and that became a reason to print money, and that's where they've been for quite a while. They did very, very well creating the Halo universe, the Destiny universe, and riding this trend of basically creating trends, as Halo did in Combat Evolved, and again in Destiny, in terms of online hero shooters and how that worked with the raid and everything else, and the popularity of it. But the age-old greed always creeps in, and based on the news again this week in the headlines and the stories and all the cutbacks and layoffs again. Again, I'm not going to go over it, but as I said, what happened. This is another example. When I said big and small, here's another big one. Doesn't get much bigger than this in terms of popular, big multinational, huge company with lots of money, big profit, now owned by Sony. This is what I said in that video about you build a company up from nothing and you create a highly profitable IP, and it's all about IP. Everything's about IP. It's about IP and growth, growth and IP. And you make millions and millions and millions, and you create interest with investors, and they're all hungry for more, and they come in and they want to give you money, and they're printing money and throwing it at you. This is what happens, and the owners get rich quickly. As I said, individuals can make millions even when a company goes pop. So this is standard stuff, and selling Bungie to Microsoft would have made the owners a fortune. And then buying that back and going independent obviously would have had a cost, but I'm also sure that some of that was partly funded by shares elsewhere and other investors coming in to get them away from Microsoft and back onto the market. And you get companies that promote that as well, because they get a buyout if there's another purchase that went well, which the next one did. Because I think Sony buying them and ultimately absorbing them, which is what looks like is happening now, they have got to this point where they've become this soaring eagle, as Bungie have, and they've now come crashing down to earth. And Sony have helped ease the huge screw up that this is. Again, it's very clearly a case of mismanagement, on an epic scale in terms of what they've been doing for the past few years. Not quite the same as 343i, but the same thing when you just take your eye off the ball and your priorities shift. Poor business sense overall, or selfish actions, whichever one, again, same thing I said before, has left the coffers empty for the company overall. And although this is clear from the outside looking in, as I am, but it's poorly judged development and lacking expansion paths, both from the fans themselves and the sales, in terms of not understanding what was going to work. And the CEO himself, Pete Parsons, stated the exact same thing recently on the back of more layoffs, with 100 that went previously the year before. You can see the statement online. I'm not going to read it out to you, but they again, just that's corporate speak for, I made loads of screw up, and everyone else is going to take the hit for that. I'm going to kick the can down the road, and potentially, he's almost going to get the by boot. It's almost certain now. It's just a case of what his shares are and where he is. But I'm pretty sure that he is almost certainly going to be out the door at some point because of what's gone on. It isn't just him, obviously, but as a CEO, he's going to have to hold the can, because ultimately somebody's got to pay, and there's too many situations in Bungie the last couple of years in terms of decisions made that somebody doesn't take the hit, and Sony are not going to just accept that. So that's almost a given, but I'm not going to get into that. And again, to go through all the options that they did when they exhausted their options, 350 staff laid off. Now Sony have managed to reallocate some of those, so maybe it's via a 2P scheme or other method, in terms of 150, I think it is, or 130 something. They've been brought into over a staggered period within SIE in terms of the internal studios, and 200 people now on top of the 100 before are now out of work. And that same CEO, Pete Parsons, allegedly has been around buying cars and bikes and houses and into the millions on the back of those said same profits, which, let's be honest, he's entitled to do if he built the company up from nothing, and that's his money from the shares that he's had. And so long as he's not eating into company profits, he could do it, and he's happy to. But it does highlight, his selfish, self-obsessed, tone-deaf and kind of naive personality here, in terms of he's got greed, he's got carried away, and he's taken his eye off the ball, because that shouldn't be your main priority, and it certainly shouldn't be something that's in the public space. I know it's hard in this day and age to keep things secret, but just don't do it while that's going on. Just stick with the Maserati you've got, or the MV Agusta or whatever you've got. Just stick with what you've got for now and make do later. It's just it just shows bad character and bad judgment, in my opinion. And it's a prime example of what I meant by profit and loss can coexist at the same time in the same space. You've got a company that's losing money hand over fist, and yet you've got an individual that's richer than ever. So this is what I mean about individuals get rich, companies get poor. So somebody's going to have to foot the bill for all this. And I feel that Sony bought Bungie at its worst, in my opinion. I think they overpaid. I've always thought that. I thought, was it 3.6 billion? Destiny was already not falling down, but it was on its way down. And the latest update didn't really set the world on fire, and it hasn't really done a lot. It's done a lot wrong, and they kind of lost their way. And I think the writing was on the wall that Bungie may become a subsidiary of Sony Computer Entertainment now in terms of their internal studios, and possibly even become a consultancy for PlayStation online gaming plans, because they have got a lot of plans around that, and they've got a lot of games coming out. And again, it's all around the economics here, but the running cost of Bungie just needs to match its profit and loss rate. At the end of the day, it has to be self-sustainable, and that's the point of buying Bungie. If it doesn't pay for itself, it doesn't wash its face at the bare minimum, what's the point in having it? And reality says that it needs to be doing more than that. They didn't buy it for it to just make a running cost. They bought it so that it would make profit, and also they bought into that expertise within that company. The talent needs to be used to create a better online presence. So I think the rumours are that Herman Hulst's taken over the reins now, and that points to it almost certainly now being focused, becoming a cost centre for PlayStation. And that means cost reduction. You've got to reduce that operational cost. So they're going to absorb much of the stuff that as much as they can into Sony internally, keeping all those economies of scale across the business, and then keeping as much of the talent as possible inside, and then moving everyone or whomever they can to internal studios to manage that level and maintain some level of ROI on that 3 billion or whatever it was, 3.6 I think it was. Because that made a huge payday for the main owners. But it's a great shame, in my opinion, is it kind of stands in parallel with what I just said about the Braid story, in that the problems here are exactly the same as everyone else, just on a far, far larger scale, and far more reckless and rockstar approach as we're seeing here, with it kind of pissing away company profits. It's at the level of that Atari would be proud of. So that's a shame, real shame for that. Shame for a great company, shame for all the people involved, and just a shame, I think, for Sony in terms of I think they've bought a bit of a poison chalice at this point. So let's hope they can turn the ship around.
If we can give it a new zip and a pizzazz, it's going to be financially successful, as well as, I think, a very serious part in the leisure time activity of the American people.
So next up, we have brand new games. We are heading into a busy month this month. There's quite a few games coming out. One of the big ones is Ubisoft's big Star Wars Outlaws, which, again, is another game that doesn't seem like it's getting a lot of love and potentially might not end up being that different from everything else they've made. But I'm holding out hope. There's just chance it's a very good game. The demonstration's probably not standing up really high, but the reason I'm talking about this game, obviously I will be covering it when it comes out across all formats. It's on PC, it's on consoles, but they've just put forward all of their kind of minimum recommended specs on the PC side. And again, this brings me back to a point I've made before, which is around last year or a year before, wherever I made the video, I talked about the fact that talent in teams and experience is important. And what we've got now is we've got a lot of developers, and I'm coming first hand from myself when I say this. There's a lot of developers that I work with that don't understand the basics, as I class them, as hardware. So they write code, they take libraries, they drop libraries in, they fire stuff off, they compile it, they run it, or sometimes they don't even compile it. It's just live language or scripting stuff. They don't understand optimization, data access records, kind of caching, batching, hardware, all that kind of good stuff. You can get away with it a lot in abstracted stuff, but again, it brings me to a point around the fact that software is generally just really bad nowadays. I've always moaned about this for years, and it's just generally getting worse. And this is one of the reasons why. But when it comes to games, performance is key. If you're using an engine that's all around high performance, fast response, input times, everything else is important. Resolution, performance, everything's key. We definitely have seen that in the sense of we've got a lot of games now which don't run very well, which don't perform as you would expect on the hardware, and sometimes they're actually performing worse than older hardware, but it's just doing more. I recently covered Concord, which I thought was going to be a 120 FPS title based on what I thought, and it wasn't. So when it comes to Star Wars Outlaws, there's definitely some bugs and issues, and it's definitely real live gameplay in an in-development patch, so things popping in and out, AI going all over the place. So it's not It doesn't look fully finished, if I'm being brutally honest, but it is an early demo in terms of what they're showing off. I just would have thought they would have hand-tailored it a little more, and that means, I think, just editing it down. The point I'm trying to make is the minimum specs that they've put up on their website, so you can see them on screen now. You can either pay 60 quid for the game or £14.99 a month to play the game. Realistically, you might as well pay £14.99. I think a lot of people will, because then you just pay it. If you don't like it, you just unsubscribe, and therefore you only paid £15 to play the game rather than buying it digital. But the minimum specs here, which is a GTX 1660 or a 5600 XT or an ARC 750, that's 1080p 30 low settings upscaling. Recommended is a 3060 Ti, and that's 1080p upscaled, so 720p-ish at high settings, 60 FPS admittedly, but that's using a 3060 or a 5700 XT with a 5600X at 3.7 GHz, and then the high settings, which is 1440p upscaled, so again 1080p as a base resolution, a 3080 or a 4070 or a 6800 XT. It's just, and 2160 again upscaled, ultra settings, 60 FPS is top of the tree. So a 4080 7900X TX, which is, you know, just below a 4090. So that is very high demands for a game that is effectively Assassin's Creed in space. That's what it looks like. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, and I'm not going to prejudge the game any more than that. But from a visual perspective, it doesn't look like it's pushing top-end, you know, ray tracing, visual quality, global illumination, huge amounts of geometry on screen, light bounce, high-quality AI. There's no visual tell here that this game is pushing hardware hard. But what is likely the case is the team are probably not given enough resources, haven't got enough technical expertise across the board, or they're just trying to balance it across multiple teams. They're not very well integrated. They're not managing the workload very well. I don't know. So I'm not going to second guess what's going on. But from a outside in view, yet again, which is the only place we can come from, the demands seem higher than the output on screen, and that's very easy for everyone to say, and I get that. You know, people don't know what's going on under the hood. I'm not saying that the engine isn't using all of that performance because it needs to. I'm saying optimization is key, and if you're starting a game out at 30 FPS at 1080p with a plan at the very end to say I'm going to make this 4K 60 on something, that's not going to work. You've got to build it from the offset with a target that you are going to hit, and then you try and optimize later on. You can't optimize a game from 1080p 30 to make it 4K 60 on, you know, the same hardware. That's not possible. But you've got to have some target in mind when you build the game. So this is using the Snowdrop engine, as we know, and it looks from the offset that they've decided not to use ray trace reflections and ray trace quality here. They might be using some ray trace ambient occlusion or shadows, I don't know yet, but from the video footage here, you can see from the B-roll that Ubisoft provided, this is using SSR, and it's got all the SSR artifacts you'd expect. So that's a decision that they've made to keep that level of quality stroke performance. That's a balance. That's always the case. But we know that the Snowdrop engine can do a lot more stuff. So they've definitely made decisions here. And maybe there's a time issue in terms of maybe the team have been squeezed heavily on a target release date, which is August, and that is something that they probably didn't originally have. Or maybe they've slipped and therefore they've still got to hit the same time. I don't know. But realistically, there's enough bits and bobs here to show that it's still in a heavily development stage from a tailored demonstration, which this is. So we know the Snowdrop engine is very performant. We know what it can do with the Division. We know what it did with Avatar title. So it has a lot of technology within it that allows it to do a lot of things. Visually, it doesn't look bad. It looks good. It just doesn't look like it's pushing the top end. So it's, again, a good example of why engines aren't, you know, the be-all and end-all, because this is the same engine as Avatar, and realistically that did quite a lot from a technical perspective, and it actually ran quite well on pretty good hardware, but it was very demanding. So there's definitely an area here where I can see the demands come from the engine itself, but I'm also a little worried that this might end up being a game that gets a bad slate across the board in terms of its demands on PCs are far too high, and then realistically we're probably looking at low resolutions, as I've just covered, on the consoles, both Series X, PS5, and certainly Series S, which I think is going to struggle heavily with this title based on those specifications that we've just seen. But again, we'll see. I'm looking forward to covering it. I like anything Star Wars related, so that's always a good place to be in terms of playing it. The only problem is I'm not getting a good feeling from the gameplay itself. More space battles, lots of walking around, creeping around, hiding behind people that don't have any sense of noise and running, and reaction times from characters. Just, everything doesn't seem as if it's a big push forward from the gameplay perspective. It feels like it's more of the same. So from a gameplay perspective, I'm hopeful that there's some good stuff in here, and there's a lot of choice in terms of how you play through each mission. But from a visual perspective, I think it looks good. I just think the demands on the actual PC and consoles could be far higher than many of us expect. So another classic and well-respected community-driven ROM site has ceased to exist and gone dark. So this is likely Nintendo and IP cease and desist related, if I'm being honest, specifically when they have to move to the Internet Archive, which itself has a very limited legal level of protection, but that is constantly at threat each year, and only recently they had a strike themselves, which is still kind of ongoing in terms of losing access to certain ROMs because it falls in line with fair use and they're not doing all this other stuff. And Nintendo and other companies have a very vested interest in this because IP, as I said earlier, IPs are everything for companies, and if they lose the ability to have an IP, then it means that they can't make money from it. And Nintendo kind of have always been very, very good at keeping their IP close to their chest and treating it quite well. But there is I think a fair use level, and this I would say falls in line with that. But I think it's more than just that, and the statement itself says it all. But they've been running as a replacement for, I think, the ROMhacking.com since 2005, so almost 20 years. And the collection of updates and hacks, they offered everything. We all use it. You could swap characters in games to other characters like Mario. You can unlock frame rates, such as Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. And these then plays in line with all the other ROM hacks and the ROM cartridges you can get, and the multi-function cartridges like the ST2 snares and all that, which allows you to use a lot of these games in a way they weren't originally designed for, and then obviously developed for them. So I'm a big advocate for all that, all the stuff that's happened over on Atari Age, Atari Retro, which is the Atari Jaguar ROM cartridge that I covered a while ago. Absolutely amazing piece of work. He did a 7800 one, which I've got, which is absolutely great as well. So it allows people to develop for things they wouldn't be able to develop for. And ROM hacks are a way for people to get access to stuff on there. And there's more than just that. I mean, sometimes it's just good functionality that might help people out in a modern age. The Tough as Nails Ghouls and Ghosts on the Mega Drive, that had a save function added, so you didn't have to keep playing all the way through in one sitting. And that's good for people like me. As you get older, they haven't got the time and inclination to do that on hours on end. The long and short of it is they've obviously used millions and millions of us have used the site, and it's a great shame that it's another one that falls by the wayside. And there was some chat on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, and Discord, I think, that points to the fact that there's the ongoing cost, the administration, the server management, and some falling out, some personal issues across the teams. But the long and short of it is, I think the constant weight of potential legal bills, battles, court cases from Nintendo and possibly and potentially others. Sega don't seem to be anywhere near as bad, but I'm not saying that other companies don't do it. Nintendo are the classic one, but I'm sure Sony, Microsoft, Konami, other people, I'm sure many companies have an issue with it in terms of having access to all this stuff, and obviously breaking a game and making it not function as they intended by the developers. But the reality is, it's all of these things are certainly a big factor as to why this has come to be. And again, it's not specifically about the fact that I'm into hacking ROMs and cheating stuff for free. I own the majority of the ROMs that I use, and a lot of these people use them just for their own personal use and not making money out of them. And I think that should be the caveat that these companies use. And I think with it being on the Internet Archive, I think it's around 11 gigabyte, the whole download of everything that's on there. So I've downloaded it. I recommend that everyone downloads it while you can, because you never know when you might need one of those ROM hacks. And that's the thing. It's about this shrinking world. The Internet was, I'm old enough to remember the world before and then it kind of blew up, and I worked in it, and it became this big thing. And then you move into a space now where it's starting to shrink again, and all this control is getting taken away from people that own it. So that's why I've got a vested interest in all these things. Same reason I go on about DRM and digital future. This is exactly another example of that. If you physically own a ROM, you'll never lose access to it. But if it's in the internet, the cloud, if it's in the server somewhere else and you don't own it and a company does, and they can at any point turn that server off or close your account, lose access to it, you no longer own that anymore. So that's a great shame.
One for me, and one for my homes.
Okay, apologies, back to sales and budgets and marketing and console and platform wars, but sorry, last time I'll do it for now, I promise. But I did notice this, and again, it's just me reinforcing what I've been saying for years, which is Xbox and Nintendo profits were announced along with Sony's, but they was done quite a while ago, and both look to have a clear view that their target audience and current software platforms are shrinking, as in the hardware that builds up their software platform. The difference is, obviously, Nintendo are still doing better numbers with a 7-year-old piece of hardware than Xbox are with 4-year-old hardware. Nintendo are still close to their Nintendo DS, so lifetime numbers on Switch is 143 million, so they're down 1.8 million over last year, but that's still 2.1 million in a year. It's still great for such an old machine, and now which must be running out of audiences to hit. So it's done absolutely incredible. Again, hands in the air. I called that completely wrong at the beginning of the generation, where I thought that the Switch just wouldn't take off. But these things happen. They did a really, really good job in terms of getting the third parties on board and making some great games on the hardware. And it shows that hardware is not the be-all and end-all. It never has been. People always go on about the best hardware wins. It's not true. Absolutely, it's never been true, in fact. Right back to the beginning with the Atari VCS and the Intellivision. The Intellivision was later, much better hardware. It didn't beat the Atari VCS. So it's not always about having the best quality hardware. It's about having the full package, which is about having the best quality hardware, the best software, the best support, and the best price. All those things come into account and how well you market it. But anyway, digressing again. Xbox have obviously not shown their numbers because they haven't done that for years, but they do show some of their numbers, and the ones that stood out to me, at least, was the hardware reduction year on year. So more so the past 2 years, kind of showing what I said years ago is true. Microsoft know it's true, which is why they're moving into this third-party publishing market. I said before, they're going to route Sega. They clearly are, with obviously caveats to that. They still have a very clear and different business and route to market that Sega didn't have. But fundamentally, they're not fighting that fight anymore. They gave it up years ago. And they said that when Phil said things like, our real competitor is not Sony or Nintendo, it's Google and Apple. That is true, because they're going down after that ecosystem rather than getting hardware out the door. And that's more true now than ever, in the fact that they're going to pull out the hardware race, whether officially or slowly over time. But like I say, I said this years ago, I still think that they'll do an outsourcing solution and get Xboxes coming from third-party OEMs, which will build the hardware, license the brand, and sell it. Like you see from MSI and Asus and the ROG and all that kind of stuff. And we know they're coming out, but because their numbers show it, 42% drop this quarter, following a previous 31% drop the quarter prior. That's a huge reduction. Means that Xbox have lost more than half of their sales. These aren't kind of incremental; they don't stack. So this doesn't mean that they're now 70% down or whatever. But this means that the 42% is a smaller number probably than the 31%. But it shows the decline is accelerating, not reducing. That's the point. That's why percentages and numbers matter. It's the whole, the classic saying, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. You can make statistics say what you want to say, but if you understand them, it also hides your lies. And at this point, what you're seeing is there's an accelerated reduction in the hardware sales of Xbox. So it's dead. It's never been so clear that a console has lost the fight, other than when Saturn died. And Saturn, people forget this. A lot of people on the internet talk about the fact that the Saturn was dead on arrival. It wasn't. In fact, the Saturn was the opposite. The Saturn was beating the PlayStation for a few months in Japan, and it did pretty well in Europe for a good period of time. In fact, the first year or so. So Sony didn't dominate straight from the off. They dominated over a period of time. But with the Xbox, that's just been from the get-go. It's just gone down the hill. But anyway, the point is that Xbox have lost, I would say probably half of their growth rate of hardware this early in. And because they don't post the numbers, we don't really know where they started, but it probably wasn't a good place. And we know, based on what Sony have said and what Microsoft have kind of indirectly said, it's over double the amount that PS5 sold compared to 2 SKUs that are available. I know there's 2 SKUs on the PS5, but they're basically the same. One's digital, one's not. Whereas in the Xbox case, there's 2 very distinct SKUs where you get a very different experience in the S and the X. But Sony also dropped sales themselves. The market is shrinking. There's absolutely no argument about it. Some of that is around the fact that there's all these other external issues that are killing the games industry. One, there's not a huge amount of games coming out. 2, they're all pretty similar. And there's a lot of, politics, like it or not like it, in the gaming space that's pushing people away and they're going elsewhere. We saw it in the music industry where that's been killed by all the digital platforms. It means officially dead now, I think, music, as far as anyone's concerned in terms of new music. Film industry's gone that way, and games have obviously gone that way. So Sony are also being bitten by that, but also they've not really put any games out for the past 12 months or more that have been huge headline grabbers in terms of what they normally have done, and they haven't got a roadmap that's visible to the public. They've obviously got a roadmap, but we're not seeing it. So at the moment, that all makes sense. Sales will be down because you're not going to buy a new hardware this late in the generation if there's nothing coming out. Plus, the PS5 Pro rumours will also probably slow down some of their sales, where people will think, well, do you know what, I'll wait and see what that comes out at. But overall, Sony are coming from a much larger base. So their percentages are smaller from a bigger starting point. So it's still a much smaller reduction than Xbox are having with much lower numbers. So that's the point I'm trying to make. There isn't all bad news here, though. There is some good news. Xbox gaming revenue has leapt up by 44%. So it still shows that they're hearing the tills ringing, which is important. But almost all of this is down to the Activision acquisition, which was like 48% of the boost to the total gaming space this quarter. So Activision itself made like 1.6 billion in revenue. Their operating income was obviously in the negative, but it's because it was still a net loss for Microsoft overall, and the fact that it still cost them 570 million this quarter for that Activision revenue of 1.6 billion. So this is, again, not getting into financials, but operating income is the kind of cost you have of running a business after you deduct all your staff costs, you know, the GOG sales, the cost of sales to the market. That has to be, like I say, this is what I said before around the Bungie stuff, it has to wash its face. You have to have some level there. And this is where cost centers come into it. And this is effectively what Xbox is. It's a cost center for Microsoft. So they'll be keeping their eye on this to make sure that cost center, you know, washes its face at a certain point. They have to recoup that revenue back from the Activision acquisition, and that's a lot. That's a lot more than what we saw from the Bungie one. So there's a few quarters left in here for Microsoft to make their money back, but they will. Activision are huge. You know, it's not just in the console space; it's also in the mobile space as well. But overall, Activision's been a great deal for Microsoft, and it's made far more money than the Xbox division itself. Because imagine what that would look like if it wasn't for this. So they've got a long way to turn this into like a net profit, but the Xbox revenue overall was still up by 61% from last year. But again, 58% of that is, again, you guessed it, Activision. So these figures would have been far, far worse had it not been for Activision, and that shows you why it was absolutely necessary that Xbox got hold of Activision and turned that into a first party via the Microsoft cash chest. The wider disaster of the CrowdStrike stuff earlier this month didn't seem to destroy Microsoft Azure. I know firsthand because I work heavily with them a lot. Hybrid cloud, AI cloud, and all that other area in terms of ChatGPT. That's all a big growth area firsthand for everybody, and certainly Microsoft are getting in. And their devices, their market for devices has gone down. The Surface has dropped a little, 11% according to the report here. But obviously the shareholders were still more than happy, to the tune of some 8.1 billion. That's still a good return, and this is where your VCs come from. This is the kind of stuff they like. So this is why a lot of these reports, when people get into these and look at them, and they're not speaking to you, they're not speaking to the business, they're speaking to investors. That's what these are all done. Exactly the same as Sony and their investment speech. You know, they're quoting growth in IPs and how much money they've made and how profitable PS5 is as a business case and the hardware platform compared to their previous ones. That's all around attracting new people to put more money into the Sony pot. Xbox are in exactly the same place, except that's largely coming through Microsoft. So overall, though, this does paint a good picture. You know, Microsoft are not in a bad place. Xbox may well be in the red, but Microsoft is very much in the black. So it's a good place for them to build as a multi-platform developer. And the big thing here, the big news story, which they're not wrong on, is the fact that they've now expanded where they have their marketplace in terms of they've pushed out the Amazon stick. So they've got Xbox everywhere. That's going to be their future. Their new console will be the next generation will be heavily cloud-based, obviously. So you'll probably get, you know, potentially a really great controller, and that's your console. You connect to the cloud, really low latency, no cost, use it anywhere, or low cost in terms of your entry fee, but infrastructure is theirs, and you have to subscribe. That's the kind of stuff I expect that Microsoft are going down for the future. So don't expect hardware in the common sense of the word. Expect it to be a SaaS service, in some way, shape or form that has a hardware connected to it, and expect that to be a variety of methods to get in, or up to and including potentially, like I say, these licensed third-party hardware pieces. So overall, the news is not great for Nintendo. I think it's the sense that they're now officially reached the end. So I think they dragged out their Switch as long as they possibly could. The Switch 2 is coming next year, so that's exciting. There's lots of new stuff to talk about on that one at another time. And that really just kind of highlight where we're at in terms of Microsoft. They are going to be making money. They are going to be doing a lot of transitional work in terms of their transformation perspective. Their third-party work will ramp up. We've already know that, as I said, more games will come to PlayStation 5. Rumours abound, as I said, that Starfield's coming this year. Indiana Jones is coming this year. I expect a lot more titles to come very early on, to come to PC, to Xbox and to PS5, because that's just good business sense, because they're not going to make the money on the hardware. This kind of tells you that. No one's going to be buying it on Xbox. And they've almost conditioned their platform user base now to not pay for games. Game Pass is, I expect it. And they changed the Game Pass earlier. I missed that as a news story, but they did what they always do, what I've always said they do. They break up the tiers, they charge more for everything, and they break it up. And now they've got rid of Day One. So no longer is Game Pass a known entity as Day One gaming. Now it's a case of you can get that if you pay for the extra one. And consoles get a worse deal. That tells you more than you need to know. If you've got PC, then you get full, including exclusive Day One access, for less money than it takes you to get the one I've got, the Ultimate, which gives you PC and console with Day One, which you don't need. So they need to sort that out so that you can still pay the same price for console and just get console games, not have PC. But anyway, I digress again. This will be the last time for this video that I talk about financing, but I do want to kind of ask your opinion on this in terms of, does this add value? I'm not that interested. It's obviously something that I'm aware of in my space. I do a lot of finance, accounting, sales, working with marketing, budget tracking, presentations, open market tenders, all that kind of stuff. So I'm aware of how all that works, and I do it day to day, but I'm not a chartered accountant. I know it a great deal, enough about it in this area over the past few decades and my roles and experience to talk about it. But let me know if it's kind of good stuff or not good stuff. And I will be having a wider chat with somebody who is more knowledgeable in this area on a future episode, so look out for that as well. But give me your feedback below if this just does your head in and doesn't add any value. But overall, my view on this is the fact that Xbox are still continuing their trend of transitioning to this new model, which will be completely SaaS based, with potentially not letting Xbox as a brand die, but allowing that to be a money spinner in terms of, you've seen it already. They've got branded controllers and drinks and cereals and sweets and deodorant and whatever else. They're not going to lose that by saying to MSI, Asus, anyone else, say, do you want to make a handheld console that is an Xbox that has the ability to plug in? So basically a Switch hybrid solution that is an Xbox console made by a third party that's branded and paid for by them. So they have an IP license. So think of the 3DO model effectively, except that the software now is taken care of by Microsoft, lightweight VM and abstracted from the hardware, so therefore multiple vendors can make one box. This is what I think you're seeing in terms of their target, and you're just seeing the realisation of it in the market. The market's now understanding that's happening, therefore they've stopped buying Xbox hardware. Retro news. Let's get into some positive retro news to wrap things up before I go into questions. So the first one is 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever. So 35 years ago now, actually. 35 years ago. Jesus Christ. In 1989, July 1989, give or take, the Game Boy was launched, and it grabbed everyone's hearts and minds and heads in terms of the very first dedicated handheld console was here. So going from one console to the next. The Game Boy was an amazing piece of kit. Again, at the time, it went up against the Lynx, which came out just slightly afterwards. Far, again, just reinforcing what I've just said about the best hardware doesn't always win. The Lynx was significantly superior, and you can see them on screen now, my two that I've had for years, and yet, in fact, this is the launch Game Boy that I had. The Lynx I bought a little later. The Lynx was far more powerful than the Game Boy. Absolutely blew the socks off. In fact, it had sprite scaling, all those kind of functionalities long before the SNES had it. And it was a very powerful piece of kit that could run, very high quality games, specifically even for home use, let alone in a handheld in 1989. Remember, at this point, the Mega Drive wasn't even available in the West. It was just coming to the US. And that kind of launched at the same time, 89. So I think it was August, in fact, in America. I actually already had my Mega Drive at the time in 1988. I bought mine in November. I bought an import one, Japanese import. And I didn't actually swap that until about 93 when I sold it. I did buy a British one in 1990, and I kept that with my Mega CD. In fact, you've seen that in my videos, Mega CD, Mega Drive. That's my original launch one from back then. So 1990, 1992. Mega CD 92, 93, 92? I can't remember, 92. And I sold my Japanese one, which I wish I'd kept, but that came out August this month, 35 years ago in America. So there you go, 35 years. The Genesis is 35 years old, and the Game Boy is 35 years old. They came out at the same time, and the Atari Lynx is 35 years old, all in 1989. And that's why those days are so special to me, because imagine that now. Imagine something brand spanking new you'd never even thought of hitting the streets. So the Mega Drive, I've covered this in previous videos, but that was like arcade quality, and I was playing the Amiga. And trust me, the Amiga was amazing, and I'd gone from the ST to the Amiga, so the Amiga was even better, and it was like, wow. But when I saw Alter Beast on the Mega Drive, and I've been playing Alter Beast in the arcade, I was blown away just how good it looked, how close to the arcade it was, and how much faster and smoother it was than the Amiga. Bearing in mind the Amiga port was crap, and it could have been far better. But yeah, fundamentally, the Mega Drive was like the very first proper. I mean, it was built on the System 16 board, so it's very close to an arcade, a proper Sega arcade. Then the Game Boy just happened to be this. Tetris did a lot of the heavy lifting there, but also the battery power of the Game Boy was just immense, and therefore the Lynx was just slightly more expensive, slightly more cumbersome, a lot less games, didn't have as good marketing, didn't have the kind of pizzazz that Game Boy had. And then you obviously had the brand recognition of Nintendo. So you had Super Mario, you had Donkey Kong, you had all the other games that came with that. So therefore, people got very heavily involved, and certainly with the Nintendo Entertainment System. And in fact, the Game Boy was the big win for Nintendo in the UK. I don't think the Nintendo Entertainment System wasn't very big. Certainly for me as an older kid then, when it came out, I was more into. I'd already gone through the Spectrum 64 ST. So by the time the NES came out, it felt like a younger toy to me. The Master System, I played a bit of that as well. Sega were much bigger, and even the Game Gear couldn't touch the Game Boy in terms of impact. So the Game Boy was an amazing piece of kit. It did a great job, and it really pushed Nintendo forward across a wider portion of Europe, and certainly helped them when it came to the SNES. On that bombshell, we have got some questions as well from Patreon, so thank you very much. And remember, if you are a Patreon supporter, if you like this, early access, exclusive access, all the good stuff that I do, and some stuff going on at the moment with the Patreon, so if you want to jump on there, you can get access to that as well, and I'm trying to tweak things for future updates and value that adds. But overall, there's some good stuff there, some exclusive access content that's currently up there, lots more to come, some retro stuff that I'm doing at the moment. But yeah, so first one is from Hobex. And he says, question for the future. Sarah Bond is saying the next Xbox will be the biggest hardware leap ever, which seems unlikely. So for you, what was the biggest leap ever in console or PC generations? I still remember turning on hardware level based rendering Quake 2 with my Voodoo 2 back in the day for the first time, and it was amazing. Ooh, excellent question, Hobex, I must admit. There's been so many. For me, Battlezone from Atari was amazing. From playing home computers like the VCS, and then playing the Spectrum, and then going to the arcades and playing that with a 3D scope, with vector graphics, with a sense of depth and things coming from behind you, that really stuck with me. That and Star Wars in 82, or 83, sorry. That was more of an experience, though. The whole speech sample, sitting in a cabinet, the whole feedback from the controllers when you played and shot, and just the whole atmosphere, and being a kid loving Star Wars, it was a big moment. So overall, that was great. They were two moments that stick in my head. From a technical leap perspective, I still say the Amiga. I think the Commodore Amiga was the single biggest leap we've seen from any one piece of hardware from one generation to the next, and it wasn't just one thing. It's not like it was like this offered up ray tracing, which it did. Remember, the Amiga was like that was the first time when ray tracing became a common conversation within the gaming stroke computer space. But the Amiga did everything. It moved everything on, and it did so many things that other things hadn't done yet. Apple did some good stuff, but I wasn't really into Apple stuff. In the UK, it was too expensive. I was too young. And that wasn't a thing that I'd be spending money on. In fact, I would have only not bought a Commodore Amiga 1000 if it hadn't been for the fact that I worked in a place where I'd seen them, and I was able to. That's one of the things that on my Patreon from a while ago. In fact, a Commodore Amiga 1000. I couldn't afford that, and I couldn't get an Amiga until the 500 came out, so 2 years after, so 88. But the 1000, when I saw it, blew my socks off. Just what it could do, multitasking. It could proper sampled sound, multi-channel stereo sound, real video. It could play back video. It could run high quality, high resolution pictures with the hand mode. It had dedicated hardware to offload work, so you had your blitter, which made it very quick to run games. It could really emulate arcades, and then you have something as impressive as Shadow of the Beast, and there was many games on the Amiga which kind of pushed the limits. And in fact, parallax scrolling was one of its big things because the fact it was so hard to do, and the Mega Drive was the one that kind of pushed that forward as well. But this was, 1985. It had effectively a dedicated GPU. It had DMA access across the board. It had fast DMA access for sound. It had multi-channel sound with its dedicated sound chip. Everything was offloaded. It was very well balanced, even down to the CPU being slightly slower clocked to match the video output. There's so many things in the Amiga that were so well designed, and you just don't. It was almost a perfectly designed machine. It obviously wasn't. It had expandability built into it. You could just plug in, your fast RAM, your slow RAM at the bottom. You could upgrade CPUs in the later models very, very easily. It was just incredible in terms of what it was doing, far ahead of what IBM were doing in the PC space at the time. And then they caught up and obviously overtook it. But for me, I still say that is the single biggest technical leap I've ever seen, generation to generation. From a visuals perspective, going to PS1, PS and Saturn was a big leap. If you were never in the arcades, let's be clear, if you were in the arcades, it wasn't. It kind of looked like the bit in between. So people say that a lot, and I don't think so. I think the biggest leap for me was the PS2 and the Xbox and GameCube generation, because it finally, that was the point where it improved over the arcade. You got to a point, and slightly earlier, the Saturn, the Dreamcast, but the Dreamcast didn't get the life it needed, so it never got to the point where it could have achieved more. And we've seen that now. Actually, there's something I'm covering on another video later, but the Dreamcast had the potential to do a lot more, and it was an amazing piece of kit. And I've covered that in depth in my Dreamcast Neon 250 videos, where it was ahead of PC at the time. I don't care what anyone says. I know at the time it was, and I've proved that it is now. It was incredible, but there was that piece in between, specifically the 3D effect and the Voodoo, as the question mentions, and I agree. The Voodoo was an absolutely incredible forward-thinking piece of kit, made from SGI teams, people that were well aware of what was needed for 3D rendering. It didn't get caught up in doing all the wrong things, a little bit like S3 Verge did, which came out before it. The problem with the Voodoo was there was very few games that actually pushed it really hard, and again, it was that in-between bit between the Saturn PS1, which came before it, and then the PS3, Dreamcast, Xbox, GameCube that came after it. There were some great demos. You see the Valley of Rue, which was absolutely amazing, and there were some definite examples of where it could be great, and later on it was great, and it pushed things forward in terms of visual quality, proper 3D, 3D buffers, texture mapped details that were far better than what was available, but it was an improvement on what was already there. It was an iteration, so it was an absolutely amazing piece of kit. It was very expensive. I had one, but that's because I was building PCs at the time. That's the only reason I could have afforded one, and then went through that whole rigmarole of that and the Voodoo 2. So the PC and the Voodoo was an absolutely transformative paradigm shift in the PC space, but it wasn't as big a leap, in my opinion, as what came with the Dreamcast, PS2, ALA area. From a visual perspective, I think the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube were the first time we leapt over anything else we'd seen before. So obviously the classic is Metal Gear Solid 2, but you had other things like Star Wars Rogue Squadron, which was stunning on the GameCube, looked like it was coming straight out of a Lucasfilm Industrial Light and Magic sequence. And then the Xbox itself, original Xbox, and all of that was around the fact that it added so much to the rendering options that games had. You had motion blur, you had depth of field, you had real-time shadows, you had superb lighting quality in terms of multiple layers, you had bump mapping. So normal maps, all those kind of things which we take for granted now, they all came in one fell swoop. So you went from very blocky, flat, 2D looking games, N64 is a good example, which was good 3D but terrible textures, so it wasn't 100% better than PS1 and Saturn. Saturn was crappy 3D, very blocky, but some ways aged better in certain games than the N64 because of it. The PS2, the GameCube and the Xbox, they don't look as old as they are when you look at modern games. You can see that we've not moved on significantly from them. There has been huge leaps, obviously, but I think PS1 to PS2 or Saturn to Dreamcast, probably slightly less, but still a massive leap. And certainly PS1 to Xbox and GameCube, I think that was the biggest leap because everything came with it. The teams used it to bump frame rates up to 60 FPS, which wasn't common at all on the PS1 and Saturn. And they pushed things forward in terms of visual quality and physics, and you don't get those kind of combinations anymore. So long answer, but two answers in one, effectively. Hopefully that answers your question. Next one is from Unicron. Unicron is a long-term supporter on Patreon, so thank you very much for always being there and giving me support. And you can check out, I'll put a link below as well to his video. He does lots of retro stuff. He's just recently done a Sonic 2 review. So if you're a big Sonic fan, which I think a lot of us were, I did like Sonic. I was a bit older at the time, obviously, but I did like Sonic, and I like Sonic 2 specifically. I think it was technically very clever in terms of its Sonic's Tuesday. And I literally just watched his video the other day, so go and check his channel out. He does some retro reviews and discussions. But he's also sent me a question, so thank you, Unicron. For you, what makes a great character design, 2D or 3D? Animation, look, feel. Also, what examples, games would you show to someone to illustrate great parallax scrolling? There you go, parallax scrolling, back to that again. Good question on the good character design, 2D or 3D. I think good character design needs to be, in my opinion, distinct. A very good silhouette. That's one thing that I think is important that a lot of people don't get anymore. A good silhouette makes a great character. Mario's a good example. Donkey Kong's a good example. Sonic the Hedgehog, good example. When you look at them without any colour and just a background image, just a shadow, just a silhouette, you recognise them. That's a great character design. That's 2D down to a T, that is. If you saw Tom and Jerry, if you saw some of the classic characters, Popeye, or with his arms up and his forearms, or Olive Oil, just anyone that came from that kind of, I think it's the 40s, 50s art style, you would recognise them in a heartbeat. Obviously, Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse, all of those have a silhouette that you could see. So when you look at it, you'd instantly recognise that you don't need the colour. But then if you add that, and you add those animational touches and nuance in terms of movement, then it adds so much more. Obviously, Steamboat Mickey, when he's rocking back and forth, that's a big part of character design. Also, the motion, the movement, the nuances, the things that you pick up in terms of their emotive actions. And Mickey was swamped with them. And that's a big part of Disney. That's what made Disney stuff really good, is the fact that sometimes they over-animated. Snow White's a good example. But all of the Seven Dwarfs, they were all very specific in terms of their actions, subtle tells, movement, all the things that you still see now in animation. And I think all of that comes from a good character design. So it's about how they look and how they move. Then it's really about, in my opinion, this is all my opinion, obviously, this is not fact. It's when you go to 3D, it becomes a very different thing. So if you're photorealistic, then I think there's no real one answer for that. That now comes down to the style. But if you're going for good 3D that's recognisable, then hyper-realistic or cartoonish, so Square, some of the best in terms of Final Fantasy games, they've got some exceptionally good character design in their games. So Cloud, obviously, is a classic one. Again, it's about that silhouette. You look at him from a darkened image and he stands out. Those things are obvious. But you can also get examples where they're not so obvious, but they still stand out from a visual perspective. And some of that is how they move. And I think when it comes to 3D, that's a big part of how you remember a character. It's as much how they look as how they move. So an example again I'll give is Jet Set Radio is a one of the kind of standout cell shaded games. That was a very specific art design, and they drew everyone in this kind of triangle, polygon-based construction with edge shading on them, and that stood out. And then their animation was also very specific, very powerful but rigid. So when you flipped and moved and landed, it was all very locked into place, and that stands out in terms of you remember it when you see it. And then obviously you've got the classic 2D games on the Mega Drive and stuff, which were full of animation. So things like Shiny Entertainment with what they did with Earthworm Jim, Aladdin. Obviously, a lot of that came from Disney's influence as well. And then you've got other big games which used a lot of idle animation. So obviously Sonic was one of the biggest ones in terms of using that. Astrobot in the modern age is a cracking design. Simple, clean, very emotive, and lots of kind of physicality. So almost that Tom and Jerry, Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin physical slapstick humour. That works a lot for that kind of game. And then if it's a 3D action game, then I think it all comes down to outfits and design. So Law from Tekken is a classic. Bruce Lee inspired character. I wouldn't say anyone designed a good character, but they did a good caricature of Bruce Lee. And I think that's a lot of it. It's what you're trying to achieve, but from a 2D perspective, silhouette, design, that's my main, and animation. From a 3D perspective, I think it all comes down to the style of game you're trying to create. In terms of good examples on Parallax, anything related to Thunder Force from that team, absolutely stunning. So Thunder Force 4, I think, is the highlight for me on the Mega Drive. That is an absolutely stunning work of achievement from a technical perspective. I love that game. It's one of my favourite shooters of all time. And the water level, which pays homage in the Saturn sequel as well later on when you go underwater, that is absolutely incredible. There was a game on the Amiga, obviously Shadow of the Beast is a good example, but there's loads of games on the Amiga that use it, and I'm trying to remember it. Something about Night of the Beast, I'll have to find it. You'll see it on screen now, but that game's got an incredible amount of parallax scrolling when you're riding the horse. The game's not very good, but the parallax scrolling is amazing. In terms of where they've used them intelligently, pretty much anything from Treasure, because they just were absolutely top of the tree in terms of ex-Konami developers that were just top of their game. Blue Sky, Vector Man, that's an absolutely incredible game. In fact, that's one of the biggest technical tour de forces ever made. And there's many others. Ones that stand out. Probably Ranger X on the Mega Drive is one of the other classic examples. That and Batman, Joker and Robin, because that was a technical marvel, that game. Both those games were, in fact. But they used parallax scrolling to create faux 3D. So rather than it looking like these 3 layers or 4 or 5 layers of background scrolling differently, they actually created 3D objects. And again, you'll see it on screen here now. There's a tunnel in the background, and you can see it's 3D. When it moves back and forth, it looks like a 3D polygonal object, and it's actually just parallax scrolling. And they did the same thing in Batman, where you have like foreground and background objects spinning past you. There are some other ones as well. There's Red. There's this over isometric game where it used 3D. Red Max, I think it's called. I'll have to check. I think it's called Red Max. Again, you'll see it on screen now. That used it as well, where you fly in a helicopter and it goes over the top and things scale back and forth. And again, it uses those kind of sprites based with parallax scrolling, so they scroll at different rates and it creates a 3D effect. There's so many great games, and it's probably something I should do in a specific video, because in fact it's such a great technique back in the day. And obviously Sonic. I think Sonic was a great example for parallax scrolling, because it used it so effectively, but it didn't stand out, it wasn't in your face as much, something like Shadow of the Beast was, which was on the box. In fact, it was so important it was on the box. 7 layers of parallax scrolling. So yeah, there you go. There's 2 good answers hopefully for you. And do you agree? Do you not agree? Do you have other thoughts on those parallax and animation, characters and design? Then let me know down below. That is it for this episode. I've gone over my hour limit, which I don't tend to try not to do, but apologies if I've gone over too far. Remember, if you like what I do here, you can help by subscribing, sharing and supporting. Comment down below, share this video, subscribe to the channel, like the video. And if you do like this or any other exclusive access or early access to stuff, and even to ask me questions and also get feedback on things that I cover in the future in terms of new content, then you can join my Patreon. You can fire things directly to me there. Happy to help people on on an individual basis for issues and problems they've got cropped up, which I've done recently on a few people with some of their personal technical problems. But also more around the fact that if you want me to cover something specific, look at a review of something, retro, new, whatever, discuss a certain subject, you can use that route to give me your thoughts and feedback just for a couple of pounds or dollars a month. It really helps. I am trying to add value there. There's a lot of things I've got in the pipeline at the moment. So some of them are known to the people over on Patreon, some of them not. So if you want to get involved, please jump over on there and help me as well. And that's it. Hopefully I'll be back in another week with another video on something of this scale, along with some other bits and bobs I've got working in the background for new stuff coming up. And obviously you can see me either on IGN as well with some stuff that's planned for this month. It's been a slow month in terms of games, but hopefully that it'll ramp up over the next few months as we head towards the Christmas break. I know, God, already getting near the Christmas break. And obviously back next week for the, this week now, in terms of when you see this, in terms of the PSVR2. That's it, I'm out, but hopefully I shall see you all on this or somewhere else in the future, and thank you very much for listening.